Okay, well, my clock shows 12:01, and out of respect of everybody's time, I'd like to say good afternoon, or in some cases, good morning, depending on where you're at in the country. Thanks to all of you for joining us for today's webinar, which is focused on how your companies can be central rather to the future of the successful U.S.-UK trade relationship. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a special thanks to the World Trade Association Utah for its support of today's event, and also to GoEd for its long-term contribution to the state of Utah and international trade. My name is Jason Castor, and I'm the Chief Business Development Officer for Parsons, Bailey & Latimer, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar. And I say this in a lot of webinars that we've done over the course of the last 6 months, but while I wish we were able to conduct this webinar in person over lunch, given the current environment, this is what we have to do. So we sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us virtually today. The thrust of today's conversation will be centered around really the following areas: the ongoing Brexit negotiations with the EU, the US and UK trade deal status, trends driving growth and opportunities in London, available resources to support this 200 billion per year opportunity, and navigating business opportunities in the UK and Europe in a post-Brexit world. Before I turn the time over to our presenters, I'd like to cover just a quick few housekeeping or logistical items. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded, and you will be provided a link to the recording within 24 hours to share with your colleagues and teams and anybody within your organization that wasn't able to participate live today. Second, and this is really important, we'd like today's webinar to be as interactive as possible, in a virtual setting, of course. So please submit questions using the chat feature throughout our discussion today. We've also allotted about 10 to 15 minutes of time, or rather 15 to 20 minutes of time at the end of our event for Q&A. So please don't hesitate to submit questions throughout, or present your questions to us through the chat feature at the end of today's presentation. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce our presenters. Joining us from London & Partners is James Cummings. James is Vice President of Business Development at London & Partners, London's international trade, investment, and promotion agency. London & Partners works to build London's international reputation and attract investment and visitor spending to London. James was previously Vice Consul at UK Trade and Investment at the British Consulate General in Los Angeles. Before moving to the US, James worked at the City of London, and during this time, he became a freeman of the City of London. James has a master's degree in London studies and now lives in Los Angeles, California. And from Parsons, Bailey & Latimer, we're joined by my colleague, Barbara Bagnasaco. Barbara is a shareholder and a member of the firm's Corporate Transactions and Securities Group. She has extensive experience in a wide variety of corporate law-related matters, including international transactions and compliance, securities matters, domestic and international mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures and strategic alliances. Barbara also advises U.S. and foreign clients in connection with the establishment, structuring, and compliance of their international operations, and is licensed to practice in Utah and one of my favorite places in the world, Italy. With that, I'm now going to turn the time over to Barbara. Barbara, I'll hand you the mic. I'll give you the floor, and I'll let you kick off today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Jason, and welcome everyone. I would like to start the seminar by thanking the World Trade Association, who is supporting our seminar in conjunction with London & Partners. And I would also like to thank GoEd for their support of our seminar. And I will be pleased to introduce to you Franz Kolb, who is the Director of International Trade and Diplomacy from GoEd, who would like to share some remarks with us this afternoon. Franz?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted and honored. I would like to thank Parsons, Bailey & Latimer, and also James Cummings, and my good colleague and friend, Barbara Bagnasaco, who I have known for many years. And Jason, thank you for having me. I just wanted to take a minute or two to explain to you the importance of the United Kingdom to the state of Utah from an economic perspective. I've had the opportunity to be in the United Kingdom many times and several times, and organize trade missions with our leadership over there. Our friends in the United Kingdom, our friendship is deep, and we are grateful for the companies from the United Kingdom that have located here. I remember Rio Tinto. There are many other companies that are here. We've had that are committed. We have tens of thousands of people in Utah working because of this trade relationship that exists between the United Kingdom and Utah. We feel that we have a lot of commonalities. Over a quarter of the people of Utah's ancestors come from the United Kingdom, and we the Governor's Office of Economic Development, or GOED, we take several trade missions and go to several trade shows with the World Trade Center Utah. We attend those over there. What is really exciting is that there are some really wonderful parallels from an economic perspective. We have economic ecosystems that are similar, if not almost identical, to the United Kingdom, whether it is aerospace, information technology, fintech, the biomedical technologies, and a few others. We are completely parallel and complementary to what the United Kingdom has. We made a commitment from a transportation standpoint. We've had for just pre-COVID until March, we've had nonstop flights to London, and we want to make sure that this also will be after COVID the case. And Delta has assured us that. So we are looking forward to an exciting time. Now, we have had about a couple of months ago, we've had seminars on doing business between Utah and the UK with the United Kingdom government, and they assured us that these trade connections and the agreements will be intensified. But we have now a lot of questions about Brexit. How will Brexit affect our Utah companies? How will our Utah companies that are currently in London with subsidiaries, what will they do as far as the continent is concerned? That's why I think that this seminar today is very apropos and important. I know Utah companies are known for being flexible, and we want to make sure that our friends in the United Kingdom understand that we've got here in Utah, you might have known Park City from the Sundance Film Festival. And by the way, I've also been to the Sundance Film Festival in London some time ago. And again, from a cultural perspective, there are also many collaborations. I still remember one of my highlights was when I was in London, and at Hyde Park, we heard the Beach Boys play. I remember Barbara Banyasako and I stood there, and we were just dancing with the Beach Boys, which was an unforgettable experience a couple of years ago. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful. Congratulations, Parsons Bailey and everyone for this seminar, and I'll be happy to participate if you ask me. Again, thank you, and I'll turn the time back over to Barbara Banyasako.
Thank you so much, Franz. And with those initial remarks, I think I would like to take a few minutes to talk about some of the reasons why we're talking about investing in the UK and investing in Europe in general, and of some practical considerations that Utah companies should keep in mind as they expand their operations into Europe. So why Europe? Notwithstanding the increased interest in investment in Asia, Europe remains a very desirable destination for investment for Utah companies that wish to expand their operations internationally. This is because the European Union represents one of the largest economies in the world, together with the US and with China. It provides a single market and therefore easier access to customers within that market. It enjoys political stability, and it also offers the benefits of a legal system that provides certainty, including some strong and robust IP protection. In terms of thinking about your expansion into Europe, here are some legal considerations to keep in mind. First of all, the legal structure of your investment. Expansion into Europe may come at different stages of your international expansion. It can come when you're still only doing some international sales without having established a presence in a foreign jurisdiction within the European Union. It can also come at a second stage, which is usually represented by the establishment of a relationship with a distributor or a sales representative. A word of advice there, in Europe, distributors and sales representatives are protected by specific legislation, and so do not leave that relationship to an exchange of emails, but have a carefully drafted distributor or sales representative agreement. Or finally, your expansion into Europe may come in the form of the establishment of a presence in a European country. And this is what we're going to be focusing on in today's seminar with James's remark as well. And that presence in a foreign country can take the form of a simple branch or a subsidiary. The main difference being that the branch is a simple extension of your US company. It will be engaged in the same business as the US company and typically is associated with sales-related activities. While a subsidiary is a completely separate and independent legal entity that can engage in activities different from those of the US entity, and therefore insulates the US entity from liabilities incurred in the European market. Another factor to take into consideration, of course, is the protection of your intellectual property. Your US trademarks and US patents will not offer protection in Europe, so you will have to file a separate patent application or trademark application, depending on your business. We have seen clients, unfortunately, having to buy back their names or their logos from third parties that have been faster in registering those names or logos in foreign jurisdictions. So please plan in advance of your entering that particular European market. If you have a foreign entity, then we recommend also having good intercompany agreements for the use of your intellectual property based here in the US by that foreign entity. And another area of extreme importance is contracts. You will have to be mindful of the legal regime in that foreign jurisdiction to understand what the contracts will look like. In Europe, contracts look very different from your typical US agreements. They're typically shorter, they have broader language, and this is because most European countries are civil law countries, which means that the interpretation of the contracts is left to specific statutes and provisions of the civil code that will provide additional interpretation for the contractual language. And so in the contracts, you will not have those long provisions that we have here in the United States about, for example, limitation of liability or indemnification or dispute resolution. One area of significant importance that I would like to remind you of is the choice of law for your contracts. Europe has an implied rule that says that if you do not choose the law of your contract, the law governing the contract will be the law in which the seller resides. So something to keep in mind. In addition to contracts, it's very important to be familiar with the employment laws. If you hire employees in Europe, employment laws typically are very protective of employees. They will require written contracts. They will provide for specific leaves and holidays and also indemnities to be paid upon the termination of those contracts. Related to that is immigration. Please keep in mind that some European countries provide specific visa visas for founders of startups, such as Portugal and Spain, for example. And in terms of immigration, the UK is actually implementing a new immigration law that is taking effect in December. And that will be just like Australia, based on points that will be accorded to specific qualifications and job positions. A requirement that good English be spoken has been introduced, and also a minimum salary of £25,500 has been introduced. In addition to immigration, I would like to also point out that tax implications are very important, and not only the tax treaties between the US and that specific European country that you're interested in, but also the tax incentives that can be offered by the European country if you establish operations there. For example, Germany has some specific tax incentives for certain parts of the country. France has research and development incentives for the region around Paris, and so on and so forth. Data privacy and data protection is another key element of your international expansion into Europe. As you know, GDPR is in effect in Europe. The question with respect to the UK is what will happen post-Brexit. Well, the UK has already indicated they will adopt GDPR into UK law, so they will follow GDPR, although they will not probably follow additional e-privacy regulations. And a quick word on stock options in Europe, because they're so frequently used here in the United States to incentivize employees. Stock options are not that favorable to employees in Europe because in most European countries, they're taxed as income. And so be careful perhaps to have alternative ways of incentivizing your employees there. And finally, a word of advice: even if you are going to be subject to European law or UK law as you expand there, please be mindful of the fact that US laws will continue to apply in certain areas of your operations. For example, the US Department of Commerce regulates exports. And so if your products require an export license, you will have to deal with the Department of Commerce in that regard. Another area of extreme importance these days is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which contains anti-bribery provisions and prohibits the payment of bribes to foreign government officials by US companies, but also by the overseas employees and agents. And with that, I think I will conclude this initial introduction of some legal considerations regarding the expansion into Europe, and leave the floor for James, who will talk about the UK-Utah relationship, where we are with Brexit, and also about some important opportunities that are available to Utah companies in the UK.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you, Franz. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, the World Trade Association. It's really exciting to be here, and so thank you. And you know, what a time it's been since the UK-wide referendum in June 2016, in which 52% of voted in favour of leaving the EU, and the UK government notified the EU of the country's intention to withdraw in 2017, beginning the Brexit process. So my name's James Cummings. I'm with London and Partners, which is the Mayor of London's international trade, investment and promotion agency. And there are three topics that I want to touch on today, which Barbara just mentioned, which I hope will provide some insights into the latest from London. So those three topics I want to touch on. Firstly, to echo Franz really, and to talk about the strength of the relationship between London, the UK and Utah. Secondly, to provide an overview of where we are in the Brexit process and the timeline to date. And thirdly, and finally, really speak about the opportunities we're seeing in London and how Utah companies can access those opportunities and our communities in London. So firstly, the strength of the Utah-UK relationship. You know, Franz did a great job in explaining how this is a sustainable, long-lasting, historic relationship. So I'm based here in the US, working to promote trade and investment opportunities between the US and London. And Utah has been just a fantastic state where companies have actively expanded, they've scaled, they've globalized and considered what global growth looks like at an early stage of their development. And in fact, when I'm speaking to whether it's US or UK, London companies, I often use Utah companies as case studies of how, global growth can be a critical part of successful expansion for a company. We saw companies like, Ancestry, Domo, Qualtrics, Inside Sales, Pluralsight, TestOut, ObservePoint, so many come to London, come to the UK, come to Europe at a relatively early stage of their growth. They've all done pretty well. It's a state that I love to visit from where I'm based here in LA, as Jason mentioned earlier. And whilst the reasons for why companies or why people come to London or Salt Lake City might be different, we don't have many winter sports in London. There are similarities. Again, as Fran said, it's the innovation, it's the creativity, it's the international outlook of both places that really mean people can come to be entrepreneurs, to build, to tap into the creative energy of both London and Utah. But perhaps let's back up a sec and just celebrate the strength of the relationship. As Jason mentioned in introduction, the US and UK, it's a fantastically strong trade relationship worth more than $200 billion a year, with a total of $1 trillion invested in each other's economies. It's massive. And the Utah and UK relationship is a really great example of this. 9,200 people in Utah are employed by UK subsidiaries in 2017. 13,700 jobs are supported by exports from Utah to the UK, worth $2.9 billion. The UK was the largest export market for Utah in 2017. The total value of Utah goods exports to the UK, $2.3 billion. And the total value of Utah services exports to the UK, $617 million. And I wouldn't be surprised if that grows. So you might ask, this is all great. The opportunity is massive. It's happening. How do I tap into it? But what does Brexit mean for US companies in London, in the UK, in Europe, and beyond? So moving on to the second part of what I want to speak about, a brief overview of where we are in the Brexit process and the timeline to date. So we had the referendum back in 2016. Since then, we've had 3 prime ministers, we've had numerous global changes, we have a pandemic, and so much more. But if you ask companies, how much has changed on how they do business in London from the US and from Utah, I would argue actually not that much. Except that perhaps other trends that we've seen, like the move towards more remote working, those kind of trends have accelerated. But basically, things to date have remained pretty stable. And perhaps this is a good indicator that the future opportunities might mirror what has come before. The UK actually left the EU on January 31st, nearly a year ago. Though we continue to follow EU rules until the end of this year. And that year leaves us time to negotiate, and these negotiations determine the new rules for a new UK-EU relationship from the 1st of January, so in less than a month's time. So we're currently negotiating the future relationship, and currently the UK remains subject to EU law, remains part of the EU customs union and single market, but we're no longer part of the EU's political bodies or institutions. And as I said, this withdrawal agreement came into force on January 2020. So following this, we're in this transition period. Trade, travel, freedom of movement remain largely unchanged for this period, but this does end on 31st of December 2020, so in less than a month. And to maintain continuity, the Withdrawal Act converts EU law into UK law as retained EU law. After Brexit, the British Parliament and the devolved legislatures, that's Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, can decide which elements of the law to keep, amend, or repeal. And if there is no agreement at that point, trade between the two will default to World Trade Organization rules, with tariffs set to be introduced on many imports and exports. But both sides say they want to avoid this, although the UK has said it will not do a deal at any price, and UK has given similar messaging. And just to talk a bit about some of the issues that mean that that remain over the question, which might get in the way of a deal being hammered out. So outstanding issues have included the idea of a level playing field. So this means measures to ensure businesses on one side don't have an unfair advantage over their competitors on the other. So, for example, the UK and the EU might share the same rules in areas like workers' rights or competition and environmental policy. The EU wants the UK to stick particularly closely to EU rules on things like workers' rights and environmental regulations, and especially state aid. That's financial assistance, given to government by government to businesses. But it's good to remember that, throughout Europe, we don't necessarily have uniform laws or regulations. And Barbara is obviously best placed to talk to this, but a good example being employment regulations. And she mentioned that, they're very different in the US and in Europe. And even in the UK, no one in Europe has at-will employment, but the UK is certainly more like the US than perhaps some other, European markets like France, for example. And fisheries is one of the outstanding issues. The EU is pushing for maximum access for its boats to continue fishing in UK waters, but the UK is now an independent coastal state. And you might wonder, why is this relevant? Because, it is a small industry. I don't know how many of you know London well, and you might know Harrods, which is quite an upmarket department store. I mean, the size of the fisheries industry in the UK is similar to that of Harrods, so it's not massive, but it's quite an emotive issue. So that's why it is, an outstanding issue. And also another outstanding issue is the governance of any future agreement. So this is partly about the overall structure of any deal, but it's also about how new agreements will be enforced and about the role of the European Court of Justice as well. So the negotiations aren't just about trade as well. Obviously, there are, police and security cooperation, those kind of areas that we need to look at as well. And if the UK has to trade under World Trade Organization rules, tariffs will be applied to most goods which UK businesses send into the EU, which could make them more expensive and to sell into Europe. And the UK could do this to EU goods as well if it chooses to. But I would say that the UK is taking a very pragmatic approach to this. And whilst it wasn't an EU member, the UK was automatically part of around 40 trade deals, which the EU had with more than 70 countries. And in 2018, these deals represented about 11% of total UK trade. But so far, more than 20 of these existing deals covering 50 countries or territories have been rolled over and will start again on 1st of January 2021. And new trade agreements are being signed, for example, with Japan, which means that 99% of UK exports there will be free of tariffs. And I know Barbara is going to touch on this again a bit later on the US and UK particularly. And, because the UK government is holding trade talks with countries that do not currently have an EU trade deal, such as the US, Australia, New Zealand. So I'm not here to pretend that there aren't, still lots of unknowns as we move to the end of this transition period, and a recognition that uncertainty is difficult when companies are making decisions to globalize and what it looks like to expand internationally. However, I would point to a number of indicators that I think just show how the UK emphasizes the importance of international trade and particularly foreign direct investment from the US, and particularly recognizing the strength of the US-UK relationship as well. I also think we should think about perception as well. When I went on the other day to the Utah Governor Office of Economic Development website, and their quality of life indicators are front and top of that website, speaking how Utah, and let me capture this, captivates visitors and residents alike with spectacular natural beauty, cultural offerings, and year-round recreational opportunities. I think we can all agree with that. And likewise, people want to visit, study, do business, and live in London. The creative energy of London hasn't changed. So whilst people might come to London for different reasons than they come to Utah, as I said, not much skiing you can do in London. The point is that they're both places that people want to visit, do business, and live in. People don't invest in places they don't like. Tourism numbers can be an interesting canary in the mind. People don't go on holiday somewhere that they don't like. And tourism numbers were up just before the pandemic. Franz mentioned the flight between Salt Lake City and London, and obviously that's business, it's tourism, it is representative perhaps of the relationship across various communities between Utah and London and the UK. But people will go where they want to find where they want to visit, find customers, and access global talent. And I think that trends that will impact the future of growth in London are those that are impacting businesses in Utah as well and around the world. And it's hard to perhaps disentangle Brexit and the pandemic impact. And we are seeing, acceleration and resilience, especially affecting the digital and tech sectors where London does so well, whether it's across fintech, e-commerce, digital content, healthcare. In fact, many of the industries that Franz and Barbara outlined as well are so strong in Utah. And, over the past decades, foreign direct investment, so those companies setting up in London, we've had $750 billion of foreign direct investment into the UK. That's more than $11,000 for every man, woman, and child in the UK today. That's 16,000 projects, creating more than 600,000 new jobs. So across the UK, 4.5 million people are employed by foreign companies in everything from food and drink to advanced aerospace engineering, so much more. So perhaps that's a good way of me transitioning into the third topic or point that I wanted to speak about. What are the opportunities in London and the UK, and indeed across Europe as well?
Hey, James, before you dive into opportunities, may I interject? We've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I'd love you to address them if you would be so kind.
Sure.
First question is what does Brexit mean for the UK construction industry and Conduit? And how is UK construction is contributing to the overall UK economy? And what would you see for the upcoming year?
It's a good question. I mean, what I would say is that I'll happily go and have a dig and do some research into the UK construction industry, and I don't have stats to hand, but happy to go back into that. What I would say is that we're seeing significant capital investment come into London and the UK. And in fact, Franz mentioned Department for International Trade. They have a capital investment team that are really bringing new capital investment infrastructure projects to London. And perhaps that's a good indication that there will be future strength in the construction industry in London. As one example, it was announced a week or so ago, there's going to be a massive investment from Hackman Capital in LA into Dagenham in East London around studio build. We're building a large number of sound studios out in East London, which is brilliant because much like here, there's talk about too much investment goes to particular areas of our country. In the UK, it's similar. And in London, it's similar. There's so much that goes towards the central of London. How do we make sure that investment into the UK benefits all in London and the UK? And I think, the fact that there's just been announced a massive project a massive investment project into East London, the construction jobs that will follow that, the jobs that will be built on that, I think is perhaps a good indicator of capital investment growth into the UK and hopefully the construction industry that might follow that. So sorry to not give you specific stats. Happy to come back to that and do a bit of digging, do a bit of research. But I think some of the signs that might point to what the future looks like are very promising.
Great response, James. Before you turn to opportunities, could you perhaps speak, and this question's related to touristic visas. What do you see in relation to traveling regulations and procedures after Brexit?
It's a good question. I mean, I think, there will still be, if you have a passport, you can come into the UK, you can come into Europe. I mean, from the UK, you can still, you can't travel as easily now because you will need to, have a passport to travel throughout the UK. But you don't need to have a special visa if you're a Brit traveling to the rest of Europe. And eager for Barbara and Franz to add any, comments to this. And again, happy to dig out some of the, rules and regulations and send it over to, our participants here. So, I mean, there will be changes. And I think from a tourism perspective, London still attracts a huge number of tourists from the US. And of course, travelers come over to the UK and often travel to Europe as well. And I think there will be a case that when Brits travel to Europe, we're no longer able to join the EU line. Typically when you come into Europe, there's an EU line, and there's a kind of rest of the world line. So it might, unfortunately add some time onto the time it takes to come into Europe. But, still, I mean, the way that London works with Europe and London and partners, we're also the tourism bureau for London. So as well as attracting businesses to London, we also attract tourists to London. We attract major events to London. We attract students to London. And we're very confident that, London is a fantastic offer. And we've been we did a project with Paris, for example, a year or so ago. And by the way, all of these things I'm talking about, I mentioned earlier that, perhaps I'll talk about it a bit more in the opportunities as well. But, the referendum was in 2016, and London still attracts more investment. It still attracts a huge number of tourists. And we've actively been working with cities like Paris to make it easier for when visitors come to London, that they can jump on that Eurostar. They can be in Paris in a couple of hours, that they can be in Amsterdam, they can be in Brussels. So I would say that we're going to continue to attract significant number of tourists to London from the US, but let's continue to make sure that when tourists come, they're able to take advantage of everything that Europe has to offer.
Well said, thank you.
So, I mean, moving on to the third and final point that I wanted to touch on, the opportunities in London and the UK, the fundamentals, which Barbara touched on, of why companies set up in London, drive business across Europe from London, not a lot has changed. Brexit doesn't really impact lots of these fundamentals. London is a city of creative energy. It's dynamic. It has an exciting future. Partly this is because of its connectivity, its customers, its capital, and its talent. And that's why I think businesses choose to come to new markets. On the connectivity, we have time zones that span Asia and North America, so you can speak to Utah and China in the same working day in English or in any of the 250 languages spoken in London. Customers, London has more European headquarters than any other city, so you can really find the decision makers in London. Capital, London is one of the world's top 2 financial services centers. Us in New York really lead the way there. And talent. London is we have a diverse and talented workforce. We speak hundreds of languages. We have specialities. We have 46,000 tech companies supporting 240,000 jobs in an ecosystem worth approximately $44 billion, plus 800,000 creatives in London as well. And of our about 9 million citizens, approximately 1/3 were born and raised as Londoners, 1/3 come from the rest of the UK, and the remaining 1/3 were born outside the UK. So, and if you add in the kind of commuter zone, and as you know, it's quite easy to commute into London from various train lines, our population grows to over 13 million. And, entrepreneurial talent does flock to London. So an American banker founded Deliveroo, one of our unicorns. 2 Estonians started TransferWise, one of our most successful fintechs. A Portuguese entrepreneur created Farfetch. So talent and entrepreneurship comes to London from all around the world. So where are we seeing the opportunities? Well, really across sectors that have traditionally made London their home. And London is a city of convergence. I mentioned that we're Europe's leading global financial services, Europe's leading financial services center, perhaps the world's, but New York might have something to say about that. But when you combine this financial services expertise and strength with our tech sector, that convergence means that London becomes a leader in fintech. So, we are unique. And another thing is that, we're a leading global financial services center, but we're also a center for creative and media, for life sciences, for clean tech and smart city technologies, for AI. It's the home of UK government too. So you've got the money, you've got the government, you've got different industries, and all this isn't a plane ride away. You don't have to travel to, to Salt Lake City for parts of it, and then to San Francisco or New York. It's all there, just a short tube ride or taxi ride away from each other. And so what other sectors and opportunities are we seeing, especially, as London is a city of resilience, and as we kind of evolve and move out of the pandemic, or think about what our future economy looks like? Well, from January this year to June, London-based companies raised $4 billion. That's more than Paris, Stockholm, Berlin, and Tel Aviv combined. There have been 15 UK rounds over $80 million in 2020. Again, this is just in the first 6 months of 2020, 12 of which were raised by London-based companies. The UK has 79 unicorns, which is twice the number of unicorns by any other European market. Germany is second on 32. We have 79. We had 6 new unicorns in the first half, again, the first 6 months of this year, from clean energy startup, Octopus Energy, fintech firm, Ebury, Babylon Health, which is a health tech company whose coronavirus care assistant app is helping relieve pressure on, the UK's National Health Service. We have 109 potential unicorns. That is companies valued at 250 million to 800 million, in which we're confident will scale into those unicorns. And, it's 109 compared to half that number in Germany and France. And on a city level, London has 66 potential unicorns. And, fintech does dominate fundraising in London, but enterprise software raised a fifth of the money invested in the first 6 months of the year. And we've seen the diversity of opportunities in London in the type of sectors that are attracting investment during the pandemic, whether it's digital health, food delivery, gaming, dating, clean tech, education, banking, insurance, cybersecurity, prop tech, robotics, all sectors which I think we can agree on have pivoted, have evolved, have delivered new solutions through the pandemic. They're finding an audience in London. And, as you look at what our future looks like and some of the debates or conversations that are driving global conversations, London has become a leading global center for impact tech. So solutions that address one or more of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And, we saw VC investment into London-based impact tech companies grow by almost 800% since 2015. Which again is larger than Europe, but I think the opportunity across London, the UK, and Europe is brilliant. So I say this all, and I'm coming to an end soon, but it just shows how London does have strengths across multiple industries. So no matter who you're selling to, you'll find the opportunity in London. Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, has said, our departure from the European Union is not to and has never been about walling our islands off from the outside world. Rather, it is about building bridges to friends, allies, and trading partners, old and new, in every corner of every continent. An opportunity for even more of the world to see just what we have to offer and for all of us to benefit from that. And, as Franz mentioned, the historic relationship between Utah, London, and the UK and Europe, there's an opportunity to continue to build on that. So perhaps that's a good segue to hand back to Barbara to hear about the UK-US Free Trade Agreement. But before I do, we're eager at London and Partners to support, your expansion into London and Europe, connect you to our communities, our corporates, our startups, our scale-ups, invite you to events, and perhaps we can touch more on that when we talk a bit about how we can support. But, come and join us and be part of that creative energy that exists in Utah. It exists in London, from William Shakespeare to Vivienne Westwood to Adele, we are a city of creative energy. So be part of that journey with us. Thank you. Back to Barbara. Thank you, Jason. Thanks, France.
Thank you so much, James. I think that now I would like to talk a little bit about the relationship between the UK and the US. James touched on the negotiations between the UK and the European Union, but the relationship with the United States, as mentioned, is of critical importance. And what will happen to trade with the UK for Utah companies? So in October of 2018, the Trump administration informed the US Congress of its intent to negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. And on May 5th of 2020, those negotiations started. Already 4 rounds of negotiations have taken place in May, June, July, August, and September. And what both parties intend to do is to negotiate a full free trade agreement, not a mini deal or a skinny deal, such as the one that was entered into by the United States with China, which merely had the effect of imposing some export targets to manage trade between the two countries. And so the free trade agreement will require the approval of Congress here in the United States. The free trade agreement would have important strategic implications. In fact, the UK has been aligned for 47 years with EU and not US standards and regulations. So the question is, what will the UK align itself with in its future developments? Will it be the United States? Will it be a Commonwealth approach? Would it be a Pacific focus? A free trade agreement with the United States will help the UK reorient itself towards the United States. And the question is certainly relating to whether or not the UK is willing to adopt US standards, and whether the United States is also willing to adopt more European or UK standards with respect to certain industries. One key example in this regard is the agricultural sector, with the UK, of course, being more aligned with European provisions with respect to food, such as, for example, the prohibition against certain genetically modified foods, the prohibition against beef that is treated with hormones, or chicken that is washed with chlorine. These are some of the issues that are being currently negotiated by the two negotiating teams. And some observers have proposed a dual system, for example, so that US food products that do not meet European Union and UK standards be allowed in the UK, but subject to higher tariffs, for example. Now, while the agricultural sector is certainly vital politically and domestically, it probably is not a key sector for the future. Digital innovation is. And the UK and the US are together the world's largest exporters of digitally delivered foods, digitally delivered services, and digital innovation. There are some obstacles to the negotiation of the free trade agreement in this area. For example, the UK has imposed a 2% tax on digitally delivered services, and the US has responded by launching an investigation on this perceived discriminatory tax. The UK's reliance in terms of telecommunications on Chinese firms with respect to its 5G broadband requirements is certainly not in line with the US requirements, but the negotiations are being productive notwithstanding these obstacles. The UK will also have to make some tough decisions with respect to data privacy. As mentioned, the UK decided to adopt the GDPR into its domestic law, but it will not follow future e-privacy regulations, for example. A more closely aligned trade relationship between the two countries will also facilitate a closer relationship with respect to the industry and security sectors. Enhanced procurement will also be very significant with respect to future military capabilities and artificial intelligence. And one aspect of the free trade agreement that is important for Utah companies is that a chapter of the agreement is supposed to be dedicated to small businesses, which of course will facilitate trade with the UK for a lot of small Utah companies. Now, reaching an agreement between the US and the UK in the short term may prove difficult. First of all, because Washington lacks an incentive. US companies export to the UK more than the other way around. And as we mentioned, the United States has made some very aggressive demands, particularly in the agricultural sector, but also in the pharmaceutical sector with respect to pricing to be paid by the UK for US pharmaceuticals. And the US election may have slowed down the process a little bit. What will happen with the new administration? Joe Biden has made some statements to the effect that he favors the US-UK agreement as long as that would not compromise the peace in Ireland and the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. And by doing so, he echoed Nancy Pelosi's statements. But the US trade representative has indicated that a UK-US free trade agreement will be reached. It's just a question of time. And maybe we can talk a little bit more, James, about some of the opportunities while we're waiting for this free trade agreement for Utah companies in the UK and some of the resources that are available to them.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barbara. I totally agree. I think there are lots of opportunities and support available. I mean, you know, between Franz, between the work that you're doing and between us, you know, the British consulate in LA, there is lots of support that is available to make sure that companies can take advantage of that opportunity. As an example, we want to connect you into London's fastest scaling, most exciting companies, that could be potential technology partners. We want to help you understand the opportunity in London and the UK and Europe as you decide how you enter the UK market. I mean, Barbara, you spoke a bit about at the beginning, how do companies enter the market? I mean, is it when you're doing some sales? Is it when you're, want to set up a subsidiary? So we want to help you work through that process, help you understand which market is right for you as well, help you benchmark what it might look like to set up and the cost of doing business in London or Paris or Berlin or Amsterdam, and how that compares to Utah as well. And we want to get you connected into our network. So we want to bring you to London Tech Week. We want to we have a couple of Meet the Corporates. So we want to introduce you to some of London's leading corporates, whether that's groups like, we've got one coming up this week with AXA, the big insurance company. We've got a music tech one coming up, with Warner Music and TikTok. Even though they're, US firms, they have decision makers in London. So we're using them to help, introduce European decision makers at these companies to US companies Utah companies that we're trying to bring into London. So how can we help you understand what the right method is for entering the market, get the legalities of it right, visit London when we can with Barbara and Franz and come and join, I'm a bit upset I didn't get an invite to that concert, Franz, that you went to. It sounds like a lot of fun, but next time we could bring a group of Utah companies to join us. But, come over to London, come to London Tech Week, help us benchmark, help you make the decision on how to come, and then get you connected into our community and really understand. And, going back to what Barbara was saying earlier, the legalities of doing it, the differences that you might not think about with regard to contracts, how you set up the entity, stock options. London the UK, I should say, isn't a complicated place to do business, but it's important to get it right first time to make sure that you avoid any, mistakes down the road, really.
Yeah, and that's James. This is Jason. Sorry to interrupt, Barbara. I'll jump in. A question related to contracts, and Barbara, I know you touched on some of the legal implications from at the outset. But concerning contracts and going forward in terms of Brexit, will a company or will my business have to have two separate contracts, one for the UK and the other for the EU? What does that look like moving forward?
That's an excellent question. So the answer is it will depend, of course, on what will happen with the negotiations between the European Union and the UK in terms of whether or not we'll have a free trade agreement. But as a general proposition, I would say that probably it would not be necessary to have two different contracts as long as your contracts for Europe will clarify the different aspects of doing business with the UK in the contract. For example, whether there will be limitations and with respect to the export of products, the choice of law that I mentioned before, protection of intellectual property, and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you, Barbara. James, let me pose a question to you. And this deals with incentives. A lot of what Franz and GoEd does, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, is offering businesses incentives to either relocate or expand in Utah. Do similar types of incentives exist in the UK specifically and in the EU?
Thanks, Jason. And I would say lots of the incentives are some of the support that's available, whether it's from the World Trade Association, whether it's from Franz, whether it's from us and the work that you're doing, through events like this. I mean, and I mentioned earlier about state aid being one of the, one of the sticking points as we look towards an agreement. And the UK hasn't really been a market that has provided huge amounts of state aid to companies. Companies come to London for those reasons I mentioned earlier. It's the connectivity, it's the customers, it's the talent, it's the capital. Capital is in money, not capital as in with the capital of the UK. but you know what the UK government has done, and I think what post-Brexit will continue to do, is really incentivize companies to grow and scale in London and bring more of their investment into the UK. So typically we might see companies come and set up an office in London, and we can offer you some incentives. You know, we'll get you a discounted office space and help you set up and help you get going. But I think, you know, the UK government, once you land in London, we really want to treat you like a London company. Our goal is never to move you out of your HQ in Utah or wherever it might be. But we do want you to grow European operations from that London base. So the UK government, whether we've had a centre-left or centre-right government over the past couple of decades, really, they've both continued to incentivize companies to grow. So employment regulations, as example, have become more employer friendly rather than employee friendly, which isn't necessarily the case across Europe. Our corporation tax rate has gone from what was 28% a few years ago down to 19%. And as you continue to grow and perhaps, you know, look at, you know, London has more engineers than any other European city, you know, how do we incentivize companies to deliver some of that R&D and engineering in the UK? So we do have R&D relief that allows companies that carry out qualifying R&D related to their trade to claim an extra corporation tax deduction of 230% on that R&D. So if the company is making a loss even, it can recover 33% of the loss attributable to R&D qualifying expenditure in cash. So you'll actually get cash back from the UK government. Now, I realize I'm treading dangerously close to CPA territory there, so I'm going to stop there. But I mean, what I want to say really is we want to incentivize you to come into the UK, but it's not about, you know, we want you to have a sustainable long-term relationship with the UK. So I think post-Brexit, it will be continuing to implement laws and policies that are employer friendly, and it will be incentivizing you to deliver that growth from the UK, to take advantage of that talent, to do some R&D and engineering in the UK. And you can even claim some of that R&D from work that you might be doing at your HQ through a London entity. So I think that's where it's not just about helping you land in the UK and, you know, giving you a discounted office or something. We can help you find a discounted office, but what we want to do is make sure that you have a long-term relationship with the UK. And in fact, at London & Partners, I mentioned that we help companies come into London, but then we also have programs to help London companies scale and then actually help them globalize from that London base. So we want to bring you on trade missions to Germany, to France, to China, to, you know, maybe you're doing that out of Utah. That's brilliant if you are. But I think there's also an opportunity to do that outside of London too, or do it from Utah and London.
Thank you very much, James. We are nearing the top of the hour, so let's do this in 45 seconds or less. And Franz, let's start with you. Would love your takeaway from today's discussion. We'll go from Franz to James to Barbara. Franz?
Thank you, Jason. The United Kingdom will continue to provide opportunities for Utah companies. But it needs to be mentioned that it is not just London, but it is the rest of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Utah companies are going to locations in Europe that are simple, that are straightforward, that are not complicated. One of the challenges, of course, is now this Brexit. We do not know exactly what that means as far as Utah companies are concerned. And I appreciate Barbara's comments when it to elaborating and explaining a few of the misperceptions that might exist. The future, I think, is exciting. Is going to be exciting. I do need to tell you from a Utah perspective, from a political aspect, Europe and the United Kingdom have been always allies as far as Utah is concerned. We want to make sure that this will continue to go forward. We are optimistic that in the new administration, also in the new Utah administration, as well as in the federal U.S. administration, there will be our trade barriers will be reduced, will be hopefully one day eliminated, and I think that is very important. I just want to I want to do one shout out. We do have quite a few friends from the World Trade Association of Greece with us today, which I think is interesting. Mm-hmm. And I want to just say hi to them and send warm greetings to beautiful Athens and surrounding areas. I'm so grateful. I think maybe we should do a follow-up event along those lines, after in the next couple of months, to see how has now this discussion and the negotiation will have been more crystallized. What kind of a Brexit will it be? Will it be a hard Brexit, or will it, and so on and so forth? One person commented here, what about the trade barriers? Will there be more with Brexit? Will there be less? Some of the things will be sorted out. But I'm very grateful. This was very informative from our side, from my side. And I want to thank James. And yes, I've been to your headquarters, and which is a most spectacular building just off Tower Bridge, overlooking Tower Bridge, just phenomenal. And I want to thank Barbara, and thanks to you, Jason, and to your firm for organizing this event today.
Our pleasure. And Franz, thank you for being with us. And yes, the beauty of the virtual world that we're living in and a global economy is that we can, in fact, have people from Greece joining us today. So I echo your comments. Thank you for being with us. James, final thoughts.
Firstly, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Franz. A million Brits got up today. They woke up and, they went to work for American companies. A million Americans woke up today and went to work for British companies. I mentioned earlier, we've got a total of $1 trillion invested in each other's economies. I think the relationship between London, the US, and the UK and Utah has been, incredible. I think there are lots of opportunities for you to come and join and be part of that. One of my proudest moments as a Londoner, Jason mentioned, I found the one job in the US that's relevant to my master's degree as in London studies. And as a Freeman of the City of London, I found the one job in the US that enables me to talk about Utah every day to Londoners and talk about, London to people over here. One of my proudest moments was being at the Olympic Games in 2012 in London. And I think London's riding a crest of a wave. But, all the gold from the medals that were given out at the London 2012 Olympics came from Utah. So, maybe that is an indicator of the value of the relationship between Utah and London. So let's build on that,
James, we lost you.
Many apologies. Sorry, I pressed the mute button somehow.
That's okay.
So, the goal is there. Let's make sure that 1 million people working in both markets, let's continue to grow that, because I think the opportunity is really there across London, across the UK, and across all of Europe as well. So thank you.
Yeah, great comments. Thanks, James. Barbara, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, so I would say that Europe and the UK present incredible opportunities for Utah companies for their international expansion. I would just urge Utah companies to plan in advance based on some of the considerations that we covered. And Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer can also help with that planning process and can help address some of the changes that are coming with Brexit, from IP protection to employment laws to immigration, through our partners in the UK. So we look forward to the opportunity to advising you and working with you.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. And in closing today, I'd like to extend a special thanks to all of you for spending an hour of your morning, afternoon, or evening with us today, depending on where you're at. We very much appreciate you being with us. A special thanks to the World Trade Association of Utah, Franz Kolb from the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Thank you for participating. James Cummings from London and Partners, thank you for your involvement. And to my colleague and friend, Barbara Bognasaco from Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, thank you for working so hard to put this webinar together. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, we will be sending out a link to today's recording, and that will, we'll get that to you within the next 24 hours. And I agree with Franz, we should do a follow-up webinar sometime in the next 3 months after we have more information and a better understanding of where this is all heading. So to all of you, I wish you happy holidays. Be healthy, be safe, and be well. Thank you.